good afternoon to you all. It's very nice to have you with us. My name is Judith Pucci, and I am a Tribute Center walking tour guide. This afternoon, you are here to hear two of my fellow guides tell you stories of their experiences from that day. As you will hear, their stories go beyond the historic events of September 11th, and they explore instead the personal costs of that day. So let me introduce you to Frank Ventura, who is obviously sitting next to me, and Leokadia. Leokadia immigrated from Poland to the United States in 1989. She is the American story. She is an engineer. Her office was on the 82nd floor of the North Tower. That was the first building to be attacked that morning. Frank is a detective sergeant. He was with the New York City Police Department now for almost 25 years. On September 11th, he was with the Brooklyn North Narcotics Division. We're going to begin with Leokadia's story, so I am going to briefly set the scene for you. It is the morning of September 11th, 2001. The time is now 8:46 a.m. That is when the first plane, hijacked Flight 11, is crashed into the North Tower. About 1,300 people, a little over 1,300 people, are on the floors above impact. All of them die. Access to every elevator and stairway was destroyed by the plane. Leokadia's office was about 14 floors below impact. So while she was very much in danger, she at least had the chance of surviving. It's all yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. On September 11, 2001, I was given a second chance in my life. That day started for me like most other work days. I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning in my Brooklyn apartment, had a little breakfast with my husband. He prepared fresh coffee, and we made plans for dinner later that day. My husband drove me to work every day. He left the apartment before me to get our car from the parking garage, and I was getting ready to leave my apartment. And one detail I recall was the moment when I opened my closet and picked a very high heel shoes. And I put one on my foot. And then my eyes caught another pair of shoes, which was flat, very comfortable ones. And some voice at that very moment was telling me in my heart, change to the comfortable ones. You know, I never had something like this before, just on that day. And I did change my shoes in the last second before I left my apartment. And this little detail made a big difference for me on that day. So my husband stopped in front of the North Tower, the building that I worked in, and the one that was hit by the first plane. He kissed me goodbye in the car, and in order for me to get to my floor, to 82nd floor, I had to take 2 elevators. That's how elevator system worked there. First, the express to 78th floor, and then I changed to the local one to 82nd. I came to my office. It was 7:30 a.m., more than an hour before the attack. It was a beautiful sunny day. And I was so lucky to have my desk at the window on the east side of the tower. And first couple of minutes, I spent just looking, at the view, because I had excellent view on that day. Sometimes I was joking that from that level, I could see my home country, Poland. And then I started to work. I was finalizing one of my projects. And 8:45, a minute before the impact, in my office there was absolute silence. And all of a sudden, the silence was broken by tremendous blast. I always have problem to describe the sound. It was like concrete storm with a huge amount of air that was pushed inward. Our tower immediately swayed one direction, then to the opposite direction, and then finally came to its original position. I thought at that very moment that that was the earthquake. But at the same moment, one of my coworkers yelled to us, "Get out, right now, get out!" I immediately ran toward the door. When I got to the door, the exit door from my office on my floor, the entire hall on my floor was already filled with the black, dark smoke. It was like a wall of smoke at the door. So I stepped back and I thought, this is the end, that was the end of my life. You know, I was so scared. I hope you never get such a critical moment of life. I was so scared that I have to die. And the only thing I did at that very moment, I started to pray. And I asked God for peace in my heart. I said, if this is your will for me to die now, please let me die in peace. And you know, whatever I'm saying now, it took just fraction of seconds because these were only my thoughts. So at the same moment, I recall an email which I received from my sister from Poland a night before the attack. It was on September 10th. And this is an unbelievable story about this email because my sister wrote about another accident that I survived in my tower a month before the attack. I survived another accident in the express elevator. It happened on August 15th. I was leaving for lunch, and when I entered the express elevator on 78th floor and the door closed, the elevator fell. There was a man with me among other people who at the same second pressed the stop button, but the elevator at that second had fallen 35 floors. So, you know, on that day, on August 15, that was the first time I thought that was the end of my life. Thank God we were not injured, but I was in horrible stress. They took us down after a while. I went home, and I didn't come to my office for the entire week because I was so scared of elevators. On the following day, I called my mother in Poland and told her what happened to me. And you know what my mother said? The first thing she said, "You shouldn't work in this building anymore." See, sometimes you have to listen to your mom, right? And I said, "Mom, don't worry, just thank God that I'm fine." What my mother did, on the following day, she went to the church in Poland and she requested the Thanksgiving Mass. The priest opened the calendar on September 17th and he said, "The only day I can provide this Mass service for you is, I'm sorry, that was August 17th. He opened the calendar and he said, "The only day I can provide this Mass service for you is September 11, 2001. So my mother said that was fine. On September 10th, my sister sent me this email and she wrote, "Tomorrow, the whole family in Poland is going to the church to thank God for your survival." Now, when I was on this 82nd floor, and I prayed to God for peace in my heart at the moment when I will have to die, and I recall this email, I knew that was not a coincidence. And I had got so much faith in my heart and just ran through the smoke toward the stairwells. And I ran down. It took me over an hour to get out of the tower. The lower floors I was, the more crowded it was. I remember when I was on 44th floor, the second tower was hit at that moment because our tower shaked again, but not as much as with the first impact. When I was somewhere on 20th floor, the first firefighters were coming up, and I thought we are safe because nobody will send people up, and I was wrong. Finally, I got out of the tower, and then, I saw 2 towers on fire. No one from us who was in the tower had any idea what was going on outside. The security people were not allowed to tell us because they were afraid of panic. So when I got out and I was standing just in front of the towers, many people, many tourists like you guys were standing in front of the towers with cameras taking pictures. And I thought I'm safe. Again, some voice in my heart was telling me at that moment, run away from this place. And I immediately ran towards Brooklyn Bridge. It took me about 5 minutes to get close to the bridge when I turned, and that was the moment when the first tower collapsed. Actually, the second tower collapsed first. I couldn't believe the tower can collapse like this. People on the bridge told me that this is the attack on America. I wanted to contact my family, and I didn't have my cell phone yet, but the telephones were not working anyway on this area. No public transportation system, everything was shut off, so I had to walk home. In my case, it was 9 miles or about 15 kilometers. So I started to walk. I crossed Brooklyn Bridge. When I was on the other side, my tower collapsed. And I thought that this was the end of the world. I was so depressed, covered with a lot of dust. Everybody like me was walking home. And I was trying on my way home every single public telephone if it's working. It took me 4 hours to get finally to one of the intersections on my way home when I found the first working telephone. And I recall that moment when I heard dial tone, my hand shook. And I hardly dialed my husband's workplace. His boss picked up the phone. When he heard my voice, he yelled, "Oh my God, you are alive! Mark, she's alive! Your wife is alive!" So my husband immediately picked up the phone. And my husband's a tough man. He never cries, never. And that was the first time I've heard him crying on the phone. He asked me where I am because he wanted to pick me up, but there was such a bad traffic that I walked faster home than he could drive. Finally, in the end afternoon of that day, 3 of us were together at home. And I recall that moment, how much we hugged each other on that day, how much we realized how important each of our life is and how important our love is. Sometimes you hurt each other with some stupid things which are not worth it at all. That day was a lesson for me, was a lesson for my whole family. In the evening, 3 of us prayed together. And when I went to my bed at night time, my husband came to one side of me and my son to the other side. And they both held my hands like this. And that's how they fell asleep on that night. I couldn't sleep the whole night, next night, following night. And I thought I will never sleep again. 24/7, no sleep at all. And then I started to pray again. And I said to God, if you saved me on that day, you must save me now because I cannot live like this anymore. I believe there are no coincidences in our life. And the reason I'm doing this and I'm here today in front of you is because I got so much on that day. And I have to give it back somehow. And I know that everyone, you also may have some critical moments of life, but if you have faith, you can get over it. Thank you. God bless you.
Leokadia was one of about 20,000 people to safely evacuate the Trade Center that morning. While those people were moving away, running away from the Trade Center, the extraordinary commitment of the rescue and recovery workers continued. It continued long after September 11th. Not only here at the Trade Center with the cleanup, but also at the Staten Island landfill, where about 1/3 of the debris that used to be the World Trade Center, about 1/3 of that debris was taken. And that is where Frank, along with many others, searched for months through that debris for remains. It's yours, Frank.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. What it was a crime scene, the largest crime scene in this nation's history. This is the Fresh Kills landfill in Staten Island. What they did was they brought the evidence, I'm referring it to you as evidence, because that's what it was, to this location. To be exact, 1.8 million pounds of evidence to be searched through for evidence that would not solve the crime, because that wasn't something we were doing. It was to identify the victims of this horrific day. Just to give you an idea of what the conditions were at the landfill in Staten Island, and terminology, landfill could mean a lot of things, but it was essentially, in New York City, a landfill is a garbage dump. Your household garbage would go to this location and would be put on piles. And that's how New York City used to do it in the 70s. It had changed, and the landfill, the whole 49 acres was abandoned, and they would truck the garbage out to different locations. So this was a spot they chose because it was, like I said, 49 acres, and it was enough room to bring the evidence and search it for any human remains or personal belongings, because that's what essentially we were looking for there. The ground was always wet. There was methane bubbles coming out of the ground. We would wear these Tyvek suits. Everybody, they're white suits with like respirators. So you didn't know there was maybe 100 of us on the field with rakes going through very dim lighting, looking through the debris, trying to identify different objects and human remains. As we would go through it, these suits were very claustrophobic. It was very difficult conditions to operate under. We had a tent that I call a mash tent, which was where we ate. So at one point, as we were going on, there were people who weren't first responders. They wanted to donate their time. They wanted to do anything. So we would go into this tent, which got larger and larger, and they would be speaking to us, entertaining us, playing the guitar, singing, handing out Bibles, just to keep sanity in these conditions. So just to give you an idea about the landfill. And as time went on, we had gone through the debris, what had come up time and time again, and a lot of the debris was unrecognizable. So you couldn't tell if it was what it was. Sometimes we had to call in an expert to determine. But these, what did come through was people's ID cards with their faces on it. And the faces were clear as day, vibrant faces like lost souls. And for some reason, we had boxes and boxes of these. It could have been something that, they wanted to be ID'd, wanted to let their family know that, some sort of closure. And that was most of the work that was done. It was done on conveyor belts. It was done with rakes. And a lot of it was hand done. So it was a chore. It lasted months. As we left there, it went to about 6 months at the landfill. It ended from maybe November till July of gathering this evidence. And leaving there and encountering people in the street or anywhere we went, we got a very warm feeling, a lot of thank yous. The thank yous helped a lot. And it was a real good feeling to get that, knowing that, you brought closure to a lot of people. And like I said, a normal crime scene, when I worked crime scenes, would be much smaller, and we would try to find, solve the crime. But the mission here was to bring people closure to the families. So it was basically a DNA job. That's the only way I can put it. So as time went on after that, I had got transferred, and I was in the Major Case Squad, which under Major Case Squad was the Missing Persons Squad. And the Missing Persons Squad, till this day, is in charge of identifying remains and people who were lost. So nobody ever stopped this investigation. It's open. It's still active, and we're working it as hard as we can. I just want to let everybody know, never forget. Thank you.
The remains of 41% of everyone who died here that morning at the Trade Center. That's a little over 1,100 people. Their names are on the memorial, but their physical remains are in a condition that simply exceeds the reach currently of DNA technology. As Frank said, that technology is improving, so the identifications, even 14 years later, continue. The most recent was this past March, a young man, 26 years old, from New Jersey. We do this not just for the therapeutic value of telling our stories, but we do it also because it was a day that touched all of us. It changed the way we all live. And for us to have a shared connection is meaningful. So we always leave time at the end for questions. If you have anything that you've always wondered about, this is your moment. Don't be shy. Don't be hesitant to ask. I know this is an overwhelming experience, so I will give you all a moment or two to just collect your thoughts. Okay, that's it. So who's first? Who's going to be bold and brave here? Please.
I know we haven't found the names for the other 59%, but how many people have had something, either a piece of ID or a purse or something that they've been able to attribute to an individual, even if you don't have DNA remains? Or are you counting that as evidence, and that is part of that 41%?
That's an excellent question. Did you all hear what it was? No. Okay, the question was, we speak about the remains, but there were other identifying objects, IDs, purses, wallets, that sort of thing. How many people who died here, even if families have not received the physical remains, did they receive something that the person they loved had with them that day? And also, are we including these non-human remains as part of those who have been identified? Correct? I've got it? Good. Frank, could you answer that?
Photographs on ID cards is a great determination that your loved one was there. But I found, working with the families, and it just wasn't enough. DNA is solid, and just so you know, to get a DNA hit, you need two sides. So we would collect toothbrushes, hairbrushes, something from the families that the person who is missing, because we didn't determine that anybody was, at that point, bad news, that's how we'd say it. So you would have to get that DNA hit they would proceed with any, ceremony that they would, because that's 100%. There's no in between.
Yes, the 41% who remain unidentified. What remains unidentified are their physical remains. So even if some object that was with them were found, would not declassify them from being unidentified. Do you happen to know if the cards, ID cards, things like that, were those returned to family members?
Yes,
too?
they were. Families were given the opportunity to review, look through them, and to identify.
Right.
Because at the point, we didn't know, who was who, and so that was they would have to make the ID and
Right.
Match the name.
Okay, good. Anyone else? Yes.
This process of attempting to discover the remains of individuals that have been lost, the event, I know it's very challenging in the way that it's presented to the audience. It can kind of be a mind-boggling predicament to try to fathom. But my question is, in regards to that, how is it a similar or dissimilar reflection to the level of self-awareness to the event hasn't happened, and now 14 years later, maybe some information that begin to kind of unfold and broaden the awareness and the scope of what took place there?
Let me see if I can rephrase the question so that everyone knows what it was. And correct me, because I'm not sure that I've quite got a handle on it. You're asking now, since it's now 14 years later, and with everything that we have learned since, does that influence, and what was it?
Sure. With the amount of information that has kind of been uncovered
Right.
and put out there, regardless of who is, the provider of such information, how deep is the level of self-awareness for this space in terms of kind of conversing and communicating openly?
About the event itself?
Sure, and bless you. You touched on it when you were speaking now, which was the power of prayer. And I know that that's not something that's often discussed on a social platform. It's kind of something that you just have to speak on it, but not necessarily delve too deeply into it. So my question is, not just necessarily the power of prayer, but the level of self-belief or disbelief in the ability of, the event to happen the way it happened, for the building to just fall the way that it did. Is that self-awareness in the discussion, does it begin to come about now that's been 14 years? I think we've been sensitive 14 days after, or 1.5 years after, but it's been 14 years. Is this something that's being talked about?
And I think if I am getting the gist of what you're saying, you're asking more about what would be a spiritual aspect of understanding in the years since. How do people process what had happened to them?
For instance, if objective sciences cannot confirm the plausibility of the buildings falling down the way they did, are we beginning to have a discussion that beyond our conscious awareness, there is something necessary about the events.
I think what you're getting to is something that has not been done in any official capacity, but individuals who, especially if they were here and they experienced that day. Leokadia's story is a very good example of how does each individual person process that day according to their own beliefs and mindsets. Leokadia is a great example because she very much believes in the intervention of God and the protection of God. I am somebody who feels that people lived and died that day based on luck. So it's very much a personal perspective that we bring to it. So I think we're all going to filter through our understanding and even exploration of the events of that day from those individual perspectives.
Absolutely. You said that, if I just may check, I'll be done.
You know what? Afterwards, we'll be outside there, so you might be able to just, speak.
It's quite poetic, that the tower is built of glass, and the heart of New York is big. So as travelers of the world, we're very pleased to be here to express that our heart is open and to embrace the pain of the tragedy.
That's it. People come here with an open heart, and that really is one of the reasons why we do this, because there is such a sense of decency and goodwill. Yes, please.
I have a question for Katya.
Yes.
You had said you had a second chance in life, or second chance after you did survive that horrific event. How has your life changed now? What is different now about how you live your life than prior to your experience at the World Trade Center?
Well, yeah, this is the question that often people ask me. In general, I think I look very different in value of my life. So I have different priorities. And something that was important for me before 9/11, it's not important at all now. My family is very important. And what I can add, God gives me also some gifts after 9/11. I was able to be present on my son's wedding. I have one son only, and I have 3 grandkids now after 9/11. See, those are the things that give me different view in my life. So it's, the most important is the priority, which definitely changed in my life.
I am going to, please, one more.
Yeah, this is a question for Frank.
Mhm.
I'm kind of, when I heard your story, that thought that kept coming back. How do you keep sane in that? How do you keep your sanity of doing that kind of work month in and month out?
That's a very good question. How Frank dealt with the most basic, fundamental aspects of death. He was collecting remains. And the question is, how do you do that for as many months as he did and just remain sane? How did you, Frank?
Well, that's a great question. You have to understand it's an occupation, it's a job, it's a calling. And we take it very seriously, and we're trained to. That's why I found it hard to call the evidence debris, because it wasn't. And sometimes it comes out, and I correct myself. It's evidence. It was human remains. It was belongings. It was twisted metal, dirt, mud. But it's hard. And we worked together for a long time, my colleagues and myself. And we can get goofy at times. So we would stop and joke around a little bit. We're throwing footballs around. Like I said, we had a tent, and that took our mind off. And the tent started getting bigger and bigger. I'm a sergeant. I have detectives that work for me. I would look around. I said, Michael's in the tent for 2 hours. Get him out of there. Because I got to account for him. Get back and start digging. because we got to go, we got to go home in 12 hours. And if we don't get through this pile, what are we going to do? It's very professional. And that's how, and then you could stop and dwell and think of the, police work, you make notifications on terrible things. And you got to prepare yourself and be professional about it. But it does affect us. We do feel it sometimes, harder than others. But, we're human. That's all I can say.
Thank you both for doing this. It's not the easiest thing to do, I know. I would like to thank all of you before we leave as well, and not just a polite thank you for having come, although that is certainly well deserved. I would like to thank you because you really are essential to this process of storytelling, because it is with you that we take a piece of a brutal day, and by doing what we have just done, by sharing it, we turn it into something of a life-affirming experience. And for that, we thank you.